It was the third week of October, and the house stank of fear, like old coffee grounds, Lysol, and the acrid ghost of burnt toast that clung to the kitchen tile after Dad's early morning disasters. I lay flat on my back, counting the slow tick of the clock. And somewhere down the hall, my parents argued in code, the way grown-ups think kids can't hear through the walls. The furnace knocked in the basement, something alive and desperate, and every time it shut off there was a soft, wet sob in the air. A new sound joined the rest. My mother's slippers, rubber soles, shushing across the linoleum, and then the clatter of mugs. They always talked in the kitchen after they thought I was sleeping. Tonight their voices had the soft fuzz of panic, like a radio tuned just out of range. "She hasn't slept in 2 nights. I mean, not really," said Mom. Her voice was pinched and tired, the edges already fraying. "I don't know if it's the pills or—" "It's not the pills," Dad said. He was never one for wasted syllables, especially after a bad week at the factory. "It's just adjustment. The doctor warned us about this. She's not even napping." The words came out tight, barely controlled. "When she does, she wakes up screaming. You know that's not how she was before." He grunted, which was Dad, for I agree, but I can't fix it. Then he let the silence drag, so I focused on the way the fridge motor made the air buzz in my left ear, until I could almost ignore the thudding pulse in my neck. After the surgery, everything was supposed to get better. Instead, I felt cracked open, like the top of my head had been left ajar and the world kept leaking in. They'd taken away my bandages and my headaches and the endless stream of hospital voices, but they hadn't stopped the dreams, not even a little. I heard the 2 mugs set down on the table, their rims clinking. Dad dropped into his chair with a sigh, the kind of sound he made after overtime or a losing game on TV. "We're not going back to the hospital," he said quietly. "They did their job. She's home now. This is her home." Mom sniffed. I wondered if she was trying not to cry or just fighting the autumn cold that moved through the old windows, rattling them like baby teeth. "If it gets worse, we will. I won't let her—" I must have made a noise because suddenly the house froze. Both voices stopped mid-sentence, and I felt a wave of attention sweep down the hallway toward my room, like someone shining a flashlight through my chest. The hallway door creaked open. Dad's footsteps, slow and careful. The scent of his aftershave cut through the stagnant kitchen air, sharp, cheap, familiar. It prickled in my nose, made me want to sneeze. "Molly?" He kept his voice low, almost hopeful. "You awake, kiddo?" I turned my head on the pillow. "Yeah, sorry." He hovered at my door, which meant he wasn't sure if he should come in. That was new after the hospital. "Nightmare again?" I nodded, then realized he needed a sound. "Yeah, but it's gone now." Lie. It was never gone, just waiting. He exhaled, came to sit on the edge of my mattress. His weight bowed the bed, which made the springs creak in a way that always reminded me of summer camp cots and thunderstorms. He put a hand on my shoulder and rubbed, rough and gentle at the same time. "Want to talk about it?" "Not really," I said, but the part of me that did want to talk was already clawing its way to the surface. I couldn't stop it if I tried. I pulled my knees to my chest. "It was the house next door. I saw it." He was silent, which meant I had his full attention, even though I couldn't see his face. "The yellow one," I added, "with the mailbox shaped like a duck." He took his hand away, just for a second, then he put it back, a little firmer. "The Bridges place?" I nodded. "What did you see?" His tone was cautious, which made me wonder if he'd been talking about this with Mom behind my back. Probably. "It's empty. Inside." I tried to picture the dream, but it came in jagged, flickering pieces, like the old silent movies we watched for history class, except I could smell everything. No furniture, no lights, just wet leaves and something rotting, like old fruit. Dad shifted his weight. The springs complained. "You've never been inside that house, have you, kiddo?" "No, but I saw it. Must have been a dream." He said it like he wanted it to be true, so bad it hurt. "You probably imagined it from all those times we passed by on walks." I shook my head, hard. No, there was more. The carpet was blue, with a square patch where it's darker, like someone spilled something and tried to clean it up. He sucked in a breath, but it was quiet. I only heard it because the rest of the house had gone so still. "Anything else?" I picked at the blanket, fingers following the weave out of habit. "There's a closet in the hall by the kitchen. The door sticks, but if you pull hard it opens. There's a stepladder inside, and a box. It smells like—" I struggled for a word. "Like old crayons and bandages and cat pee." He didn't say anything for a long time. I waited, because sometimes that's what you do with grown-ups. Let them figure out which part they're scared of most. Finally, he cleared his throat. "Maybe we should write this down, so you remember in case you want to tell your doctor." I shrugged. "I'll remember anyway." His hand left my shoulder, then returned to squeeze the top of my head. "Try to get some sleep, okay? I'll keep the door open a crack. Just yell if you need anything." He stood, his footsteps soft as he moved back to the door. "Dad?" I said, before he got away. He paused. "I think something happened in that house," I whispered. "Something bad." He didn't answer. The hallway light framed his outline in the doorway, and for a second I thought he might say something gentle or even brave. But instead he turned away, boots echoing softly down the hall to the kitchen, and left me alone with the nothing on the other side of my eyelids. I must have drifted. The clock claimed it was just after 1, but the house sounded wrong, like a different home had grown up around my body while I slept. Mom was breathing hard in her sleep, a stormy huff from the next room, and the street was so quiet that I could hear every gurgle of the pipes and tick of the old heater. My mouth tasted like sleep, woolly and sour, and I wanted nothing more than to brush my teeth and spit the taste away. I padded out of bed, found my cane, and tapped along the wall until I hit the bathroom. The light in here was too bright, and I had to shield my eyes even though I barely saw the world as more than a smudge of grays and whites. I counted the steps to the sink, careful not to knock over the tumbler with our toothbrushes. I leaned close to the mirror, but all I saw was the faintest ghost of my face, a pale blur with dark hair and a too large mouth. My real eyes hadn't worked since I was born, but lately, in the dreams, it felt like they were trying to come alive. Each time I opened them, the world was a little more terrifying than before. I spat, rinsed, and stood with my hands gripping the edge of the counter. Something happened in that house, I thought. The words had come out by themselves, and now they echoed in my head like a church bell that wouldn't stop ringing. I turned off the light, went back to bed, and tried to imagine a world where I could forget what I saw. But the harder I tried, the louder the nothing became. I woke to the smell of pancakes and the faint static of the kitchen radio. It must have been a Saturday because Dad was home and already half-dressed for yard work, humming along to the oldies. Mom ruffled my hair as I shuffled into the kitchen, her hands cold and fluttery. "Morning, baby. Did you sleep?" I nodded, but she wasn't fooled. "Any more dreams?" I hesitated. "Not this time. Just regular stuff." She kissed my forehead and pressed a plate into my hands. I could taste the edge of her worry in the syrup, the way she lingered by my elbow just a second too long before sitting down across from me. Dad cleared his throat. "So," he said, the words stretched out like taffy. Your mom and I were talking. Maybe we could take a walk after breakfast, get some fresh air." "Sure," I said. I almost wanted to tell them about the dream, all of it, but the words knotted up in my throat. Instead, I took another bite of pancake, let the sugar numb my tongue, and pretended everything was normal. After breakfast, Mom helped me into my boots and zipped my jacket. The air outside was crisp, wet, and smelled like rain on concrete. We walked the slow loop around our block, me in the middle with their hands tucked in my elbows, like I was a parade float they had to guide safely around the course. When we passed the Bridges house, I felt it before we even reached the sidewalk. The world dipped colder, the street went quieter, and the cane found a patch of rough concrete where a tree root had lifted the sidewalk. I shivered. Mom gave my hand a squeeze. "You okay, Molly?" "Yeah." My voice sounded small, even to me. Dad stopped. "Want to turn around?" I shook my head. "No, I want to keep going." I could smell the house before I heard it. The front yard was overgrown, wet leaves slick against the porch. The mailbox was there, just like in the dream, but now I could feel the duck's chipped beak as my fingers brushed past it. I let go of Mom's hand, stepped up to the porch, and pressed my palm flat against the peeling paint of the door. For a second, the whole world narrowed to the scent of mold and the faint, sweet rot of old memories. "Did you remember something?" Dad asked. I nodded. "The dream. It's the same." We stood there for a moment, the three of us, breathing in the strange, haunted quiet. Then Mom pulled me gently away, and we finished our loop around the block. But even after we got home, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was still watching from the other side of the yellow door. He showed up at the house around 2, the hour when sunlight meant nothing because the windows were small and the blinds never opened all the way. I heard his car, a big one, old, with a loose muffler that clattered its approach like a pack of empty tin cans. Dad met him at the door and let him in, but they didn't shake hands or do any of the usual neighborly things. Marshall was not the type you offered a pie to. His shoes made soft, wet thuds on the rug as he walked, and the air around him smelled faintly of rain-soaked wool and cheap coffee. I sat in the living room, waiting to be introduced like a stray dog the pound man had come to see about. Mom hovered behind me, hand on my shoulder, her grip tight enough to bruise if I flinched. "Mr. Marshall," she said, her voice a note too high. "This is Molly." He crouched in front of me, lowering himself slow, as if my blindness might mean I'd snap at sudden movement. I could feel the heat off his body, a big man, close-shaved, with aftershave that barely masked the odor of cigarettes. "Call me Ray," he said, and his voice was dry, like he'd been chewing gravel for a few decades. "I hear you're having some rough nights." I shrugged. "It's not as bad as they think. I just get weird dreams sometimes." He nodded, slow. I got the feeling he didn't care much for small talk, but had learned how to fake it. "Weird how?" I hesitated. I could sense Mom urging me, wanting me to say something impressive, but I'd learned by now that the more you gave adults, the less they actually liked you. I tried to stay neutral. "They're just realistic, I guess. Sometimes I see things I shouldn't." He grunted. "Heard about the Bridges house dream. Your dad told me." At this, Dad stiffened from his post at the door, maybe expecting me to deny it. But what was the point? "It's not the first time," I said. "I had others. They just didn't listen until it got scary." Ray kept his eyes, probably, on me, the weight of his stare like the pressure you feel from the weather before a bad storm. "Tell me about the school incident," he said, so flat it almost didn't register as a question. Mom's hand tensed, but I wriggled free, set my elbows on my knees, and focused on the way the rug fibers scratched at my palms. It was after the fire drill. They made us stand outside too long. I got a headache and had to go to the nurse's office. But on the way back, I saw Emily fall. I mean, in my head. I saw it before it happened. You had a vision, Ray said like he was tasting the word. Not a vision, a dream, just not when I was asleep. She fell on the stairs. I tried to warn her, but she didn't listen. He paused. I could hear the faint click of his jaw as he ground his teeth. Describe what you saw. I closed my eyes. Not that it mattered, but it helped. The stairs were wet, I think, from someone's boots. She slipped, hit her chin first, then her teeth. There was blood on the rail, and 2 teachers rushed over. One had a red scarf, the other wore too much perfume. They both started screaming at the same time, but Emily just kept saying she was cold, over and over. Ray let the silence stretch. Somewhere behind him, Dad coughed. The heater kicked in, then quit. How did you know about the scarf? He asked, and I caught the shift in his tone. Just a hair sharper. I don't know, I just saw it. That's how the dreams work. Mom tried to jump in, but Ray raised a finger and she stopped. Did you see anything else? Before she fell? I picked at a loose thread on my jeans, winding it tight around my finger. She was scared. Someone was chasing her, but not really chasing, just following. He smelled like tobacco and paint. She was running away, not from him, but from a noise behind her, like something had broken, a plate or a window. Ray grunted again. Was there a plate or window broken at school that day? Dad answered for him, voice low. Custodian dropped a glass coffee pot in the staff room, shattered everywhere. They had to evacuate that hallway. Ray said nothing for a long minute. I kept winding the thread, tighter and tighter, until my fingertip turned white. Finally he spoke, not to me, but to my parents. She's got a gift. Doesn't mean it's a blessing. They bristled almost in unison. Mom said, I don't care what you call it. We just want her to be okay. Ray stood, groaning with the effort. I could hear his knees pop, the way old men's knees do. There's a price for seeing things, he muttered. Sometimes it's just a headache, sometimes it's worse. He moved to the kitchen, and Dad followed. Their voices dropped to a hush, but I could make out the urgency in every word. I stayed on the couch, feeling the dream replay in the back of my skull, over and over, as if someone was trying to rub the image away with sandpaper, and all they managed was to make it hurt worse. Mom sat beside me, folded my hand in hers. It's going to be okay, she said, but she didn't sound like she believed it. I waited until the men were done talking and the front door shut behind Ray before I spoke again. Mom? She squeezed my hand. If I keep dreaming, will they send me back? She hesitated, then said, No, never. I promise. It wasn't much of a promise, but it was all I had. There are 2 types of quiet in a school, the kind you get before a spelling test, and the kind you get when kids think someone in the room might be dangerous. I'd become an expert in both. Today the class was wrapped in the second kind, a taut, sour hush that pooled at the edges of my desk. You could tell by the way the other kids clicked their pens and avoided the empty chair beside me, as if proximity itself might conjure up a bloodstain or a whispered curse. Ms. Lacey made an effort to act normal, reading from the same battered math book she'd used all year, but I heard her voice tremble whenever she had to say my name. She never called on me anymore unless she absolutely had to, and when she did, she braced for an answer like I might pull out a knife. At lunch, I sat in my usual spot by the window, hands folded over the brown paper bag Mom packed every day. I didn't eat. I hadn't been hungry since the dreams started getting worse. It was hard to ignore them, the dreams. Harder still when everyone else was ignoring me. I tried to keep my head down, but it's impossible to be invisible when your eyes never move, and everyone in the cafeteria knows your nickname is the Bat. I felt a tap on my shoulder. light as a raindrop. It was Ellie Martinez, the only girl in class with the guts, or maybe the lack of self-preservation, to talk to me in public. She lowered her voice. "Is it true you saw the fire before it happened?" I turned to her even though I couldn't see her face. "I saw it in my sleep, yeah." "Can you do it on purpose?" "No." I sounded a lot more certain than I felt. She fidgeted, her backpack straps squeaking against her puffy coat. "What about today? Did you dream anything last night?" I hesitated. Ellie was all right, but she had a mouth like a loose zipper. Secrets went in, and 2 minutes later they came out the other end, usually louder and meaner than when they started. She waited, breathing loud, hope and fear in equal measure. I wanted to tell her no, that the dreams had stopped, that everything was normal and safe, and she could go back to pretending I was just a weird kid who liked to read in the dark. But the words stuck. "Yes," I said. "I did." Her eyes widened. I couldn't see them, but I could hear it in the way her voice went thin. "What was it?" "It's not good," I warned. "You sure you want to know?" She nodded, the tip of her hair brushing my arm. "It was the Bridges house again," I said, "but this time I was inside." She swallowed. I could almost hear the saliva move. "What happened?" I took a breath, tried to put the pieces in order. "It starts with a noise, like someone dragging a chair across a wooden floor, but slow, like they're too weak to do it all at once. I'm in the kitchen, but the lights don't work. Everything's sticky, the floor and the counters. There's a smell, wet leaves and something sweet, like candy left in the rain." I heard Ellie shift, restless. "I'm alone, but I know he's there. The man, Mr. Bridges. He never talks, but I can feel him in the hall. He's waiting for me to open the door." Ellie hugged herself. "Why would you open the door?" "Because I have to," I said, even though I hated how true it was. "He's left something for me in the room." I opened the door, and it's so cold I can see my breath. There's a closet at the end of the hall. The doorknob is slimy and my hands are shaking, but I turn it anyway. She made a sound, tiny and sharp. Inside there's a girl. She's crying, but not loud. It's more like she's lost her voice or someone took it away. She's wearing a yellow dress. I can't see her face, but her hair is long, and she's hiding in the dark like she doesn't want anyone to find her. Ellie blinked. "Does she see you?" "Yes." "But she doesn't talk to me. She just keeps crying. Then Mr. Bridges is behind me, and I know if I turn around something bad will happen." "What happens?" I shook my head. "I always wake up before that part." She let the silence grow, then said, "That's not just a dream. That's like a memory or something." I shrugged. "Maybe, but I've never been inside that house, I swear." Ellie's voice was small. "Do you think it's real? The girl in the closet?" I didn't want to answer. The dreams felt real enough to leave me shaking, but saying so made it sound like I wanted them to be real. "I hope not," I said. Ellie glanced over her shoulder, then slid away as if my story might stick to her skin. By the end of the day, everyone knew about my nightmare, even the teachers. They called Mom, who left work early and met me in the principal's office, where she listened to the recitation with the look of a woman learning her house was built over a sinkhole. We walked home together in the dying light. The wind stung my cheeks and rattled the bare branches overhead. Every step made my backpack thump against my spine, a slow, steady drumbeat. She didn't say anything until we were a block from home. "Did you really dream all that?" she asked, voice soft and low. "Yes," I said. "I'm sorry." She stopped walking. I could feel her looking at me, measuring my face for any sign of a lie. "You're not in trouble," she said. "I just want you to be safe. You know that, right?" I nodded. even though I didn't. We finished the walk in silence. That night, the dream came again, and this time I didn't wake up before the end. I opened the closet, and the girl in yellow turned to face me. Her eyes were gone, scooped out and replaced with round, wet stones. She reached for my hand, and her fingers were cold and slick, like river rocks. When I tried to scream, she put one hand over my mouth and the other pressed something small and hard into my palm. I woke to the smell of wet earth and the faint sound of a girl crying, somewhere far away but getting closer. They say the devil's in the details, but it's usually just sweat and bad memory. I spent 35 years training myself to see the seams in every story, and I learned early that the truth was never as pretty as people wanted. But every now and then you run up against a fact that doesn't fit, and it gets stuck in your head like a toothpick between molars. I'd intended to let the matter rest, but by Tuesday I'd blown through 3 pots of coffee, worn a groove in my kitchen linoleum, and filled 2 legal pads with columns of names, dates, and dead ends. I told myself I was being thorough. In reality, I was stalling, afraid of what I might find if I looked too hard. The Bridges house was a puzzle. The property records said it hadn't changed hands in 30 years. Walter Bridges, retired handyman, model citizen, winner of the Mill Ridge Community Service Award in 1998, and, according to every neighbor I called, the quiet type. No wife, no children, and not a single parking ticket. That alone would have raised a flag in my precinct. No man lives 64 years without pissing somebody off. I called up the old police logs, ran a search for the address. There were noise complaints in the 90s, a report of a missing cat, one call about a suspicious vehicle. Nothing worth a second look. But then, buried in the microfiche, a name jumped out at me. Rebecca Harlow, age 8, vanished on the first day of autumn, 21 years ago. The report was a masterpiece of futility. I'd read hundreds like it. Small town, missing kid, no witnesses, no evidence, no closure. Rebecca was last seen playing hopscotch 2 blocks from her house. There was a mention of yellow ribbons in her hair and a yellow dress. At the time, police focused on a drifter passing through, but the evidence wasn't enough to charge. By Halloween, the search had gone cold. I sat back, closed my eyes, and tried to remember if I'd ever heard the name. I hadn't, but I remembered the way the girl's parents looked in the newspaper photo, stunned, hollow, as if the air itself had been sucked out of their world. There were details in the file that shouldn't have mattered. Last seen at the intersection of Sycamore and Oak. Reported by Mrs. Vaughn, neighbor, who saw a blue sedan parked near the Bridges residence. Rebecca had a fondness for cats, was known to wander. The word wander was underlined twice. I opened my notebook and read through the notes I'd taken on Molly's dreams. Girl in yellow, closet, crying in the dark, smells, wet leaves, sweet and rotting. My pulse picked up. I tried to tell myself that Molly's parents could have described the case at some point, or maybe she'd picked up something at school, but the details lined up a little too neat for my taste. Kids make up monsters all the time, but they don't get the dates and street names right. I poured another mug of coffee, black as a confession, and flipped back to my own records. In my first year on the job, a rookie with a badge too shiny for my own good, I'd worked a case just like this. Girl gone missing. No body, no note, just a sudden cruel erasure from her family's life. We never solved it. I remembered the mother's face, the way her hands shook as she folded and unfolded a napkin during the interview, like she could will her daughter back by worrying the fabric to shreds. You never forget those cases. They stick to you years later, when the house is empty, and the only sound is the hum of the fridge and your own unsteady breath. I picked up the phone, stared at the dial for a full minute before I made the call. The number was out of service. I tried the next, and the next, until I found what I was looking for. A woman's voice, old but strong, with the same tightness I remembered from that mother so long ago. She remembered me, too. "You're the detective who never found my daughter," she said, not angry, but not forgiving either. I apologized, not that it helped. "I need to ask you about the yellow dress," I said. "Do you remember it?" She paused. "Rebecca wore it all the time, said it made her feel like sunshine." "Was she ever in the Bridges house?" I asked. Another pause, longer this time. "Walter was kind to her. He fixed our fence once. She'd bring him cookies sometimes, but she was never afraid of him." I thanked her, told her I'd keep looking, and hung up. I sat there, staring at the wall, the echo of her words bouncing off the inside of my skull. On a hunch, I called the school, asked if there were any records of Rebecca Harlow's teachers. They patched me through to a secretary who spoke in slow, measured syllables, as if every question was a test. "We keep the archives in the basement," she said. "Do you want me to look?" "Yes," I said. "Please." 10 minutes later, she read off the names. Nothing jumped out. But then she said, "Her best friend was Molly Clark. They were inseparable." The room went cold. I checked the dates. The friendship was brief, but it was there. That was 2 decades before Molly, the one I'd visited, was even born. But the coincidence gnawed at me. I went back to the file, one line I'd missed before. Rebecca spoke frequently of an imaginary friend who lived in the walls. I underlined it, then circled it, then stared at the page until my eyes watered. The walls of my house felt too thin. I took the file, the notes, and the coffee, and went out to my car. I drove to the Bridges house, parked across the street, and watched the yellow light flicker behind the drawn curtains. There are ghosts in every town. Some of them just know how to hide better than others. Some nights the world tilts sideways and doesn't bother to right itself. The clocks jump their numbers, the air goes razor thin, and every surface in the house pulses like a sore tooth. I woke with my chest locked tight, a scream caught behind my tongue, and the sound of rain punching the window in rhythmic, angry fists. At first I thought I'd peed the bed, but it was only sweat, cold, sticky, and dense with the ammonia burn of terror. The dream was still there, stretched across the backs of my eyelids like an oil slick. I was in the Bridges house again, but this time I wasn't just seeing. I was there, in the walls, looking out through thin cracks at the world. I could feel the dust grinding in my lungs and the pressure of earth above my head. Someone was crying nearby, a tiny animal sound. I tried to move, but my arms wouldn't respond. I couldn't scream, so I listened instead. There were footsteps overhead, slow, heavy, deliberate. The floorboards groaned and the footsteps circled, always coming back to the same spot. A voice whispered from behind me, thin as fishing line, "Help me!" When I finally woke for good, the clock on my nightstand said 2:42, and my mother was kneeling beside my bed. Her hands shook as she brushed my hair back over and over, as if that could erase what I'd seen. "I heard you crying," she said, but her voice was more scared than soothing. "It's all right, honey. It's over." I shook my head, hard enough to make the darkness spin. "It's not over," I whispered. "She's still there." Mom looked at me, searching for the right script, the grown-up answer that would put the monster back in the closet. When she couldn't find it, she just pulled me close and held on, tighter than ever. "She's under the floor," I said into her shoulder. "That's where he put her." Her breath caught. She let go, stared at me like I was something sharp and dangerous, and then stood and left the room. I waited, counting the seconds as her footsteps faded down the hall. A minute later I heard her on the phone, voice low but urgent. The words bled through the drywall, jagged and raw. Oh, says she's under the floor. No, not a nightmare. Please, just come. I think it's real. I curled up under the blanket, but it didn't help. Every noise in the house was doubled now, like there were two worlds and both of them were leaking into my head at once. Ray Marshall arrived before dawn, just as the rain eased into a weak, exhausted drizzle. He didn't knock, just let himself in like a doctor summoned for a house call. His boots left muddy prints on the welcome mat, and the stink of cigarette smoke clung to his jacket like a curse. He didn't bother with small talk, just sat at the kitchen table, eyes bloodshot and face hollowed out by too many years and not enough sleep. Mom poured him coffee, and they talked in voices meant for funerals. I hovered in the doorway, not wanting to be seen. "She's never done this before," Mom said. "Not like this, she's sure." Ray nodded, not looking at her. "I believe her." The three words landed so heavy I thought the ceiling might crack. Mom's voice dropped to a whisper. "What if it's real?" Ray set his mug down, hard. "Then we do something about it." He stood, motioned for me to follow, and together we walked out into the raw morning. I felt the chill deep in my bones, a cold so sharp it made my teeth ache. The neighborhood was dead silent, every porch light off, every window still dark. We reached the yellow house. Up close, it looked even more haunted than in my dreams. Paint peeled in long, curling strips, the porch sagged, and the duck mailbox was stuffed with a month of wet circulars. Ray checked the front door. It was unlocked, and the hinges sang a high, keening note as he opened it. Inside, the house was colder still. The smell hit me first. Old food, mildew, and something else, thick and sweet and wrong. The floor was just as sticky as I'd dreamed. "Stay close," Ray said, but I'd already mapped the place in my head. He moved ahead, flashlight cutting a pale arc through the gloom. The hall was lined with photographs, faces I recognized from my dreams and nothing else. Mr. Bridges was there, in every shot, but always on the edge of the frame, never smiling, never quite looking at the camera. We stopped at the closet door at the end of the hall. My pulse hammered in my throat. The knob was cold and slick in my hand, but this time I didn't hesitate. I opened the door. There was the step ladder, the smell of crayons, and old cat pee. I reached in, felt along the back wall, and found the loose board. It gave way with a soft sigh, revealing a crawl space just big enough for a child to squeeze through. Ray knelt down, shone the light inside. The space was empty, but the air was dense with the certainty that something had once lived and died in the dark. He looked at me. "Where?" I pointed to the floor. "There, she's under there." He nodded. "Go get your mom," he said, "and call the police." I did what he said, but I didn't watch as he started pulling up the boards. Instead, I sat on the porch, listening to the rain and the distant sound of a girl's voice, growing softer with every minute that passed. By noon, the house was swarming with uniforms and men in blue gloves. They carried out boxes and bags, and once a stretcher with something small under a white sheet. Nobody said anything to me or to Mom, but I could tell by the way they walked that they'd found what we already knew. Ray stood at the curb, hands in his pockets, staring at the house like it might speak. He didn't look at me until I was right beside him. "Thank you," he said. It sounded like it hurt. I shook my head. I just wanted it to stop. He nodded, like he understood. Maybe he did. I didn't sleep that night or the next, but the dreams didn't come back. The house across the street was silent for the first time in months. Sometimes, when I'm alone, I still hear her voice, faint as a radio left on in another room. But mostly, it's quiet now. A week after the discovery at Bridges's place, I set up shop at Molly's kitchen table. I brought a battered tape recorder, the kind that made everything sound like a suicide note, and a legal pad fat with case numbers, coffee stains, and my own increasingly useless thoughts. The mother, Ellen, hovered by the sink with a mug clamped between her hands. Molly sat opposite me, elbows on the table, face impassive. She blinked rarely and never met my eyes. I'd interviewed hundreds of witnesses, suspects, and lunatics in my time, but none as unnerving as this kid. Something about her made the whole world feel like an unfinished crossword, every blank space hiding an answer I wasn't smart enough to find. I thumbed the record button. The machine made a polite click. "Tell me about the dream," I said. She shrugged, the motion deliberate. "Same as before. I'm in the dirt. Everything's heavy. There's not much air." I waited. "You had to wait with kids. With Molly, you sometimes had to wait so long you wondered if she'd died sitting upright." "And?" I prompted, after the silence got embarrassing. "I heard digging," she said. "It started slow, like someone using a spoon instead of a shovel. Then it got faster, like they were scared." "What else?" She sucked in her cheeks. "It smelled like old mulch and something sharp, like the way your tongue feels after you drink milk that's gone bad." I wrote that down. Even if it was bullshit, it was the kind of detail that made a report sound expensive. "Was there anyone else in the dream?" She hesitated, then nodded. "The girl, the one with the yellow dress. She kept singing, but her voice was all muffled." "Could you make out the song?" Molly shook her head. "Not words, just a tune." I leaned forward. "Try to hum it, even if it sounds stupid." She looked at her mother, who nodded, silent encouragement. Then Molly closed her eyes and hummed 5 notes, descending, then a little run back up, like something from a music box. Familiar in a way that made the hair on my arms try to retreat into the skin. I let the tape run, then killed it. "Anything else?" Molly thought about it, chewed her lower lip. "The wood was wet," she said. "I don't know how, but I could feel it. Under my hands." I jotted it down, tried not to let the pen's tremor show. "You've never been in that house, Molly?" She gave me a look I'd seen on witnesses too many times before. The weary, why-are-you-still-asking face. "No," she said. "I already told you." I turned to Ellen. "She ever play over there, even before the dreams?" Ellen shook her head, a brittle motion. "She never liked the look of it, even before the dreams started." She wiped at her cheek, as if something invisible needed cleaning away. I closed my pad. "Thank you. That's all for today." Molly stood without being told. "Can I go to my room?" I nodded. She left, her cane tapping a steady rhythm down the hallway. Ellen lingered, eyes darting to the floor. "Is it normal?" she asked, "for things like this to get worse after what happened?" I didn't know how to answer. "Grief is a weird animal," I offered. "Sometimes it burrows in. Sometimes it just squats in your kitchen and drinks all your coffee." She managed a laugh, but it came out warped. I packed up my things. As I reached the door, she stopped me. "You'll keep coming, right? Even if it's just to talk to her?" I hesitated. It was against my nature to promise anything, but I said, "I'll be here tomorrow, same time." On the drive home, I played back the tape. Molly's humming crawled into my ear and nested there. 5 notes, over and over. I thought about the way the girl described the wet wood, the digging, the lullaby. It was textbook trauma, except she'd never met the dead girl, and the details lined up too well. I tried to shake the feeling that the case was staring back at me from the other side of the glass. That night I dreamed of my own daughter, her face lost in shadow, humming a tune I couldn't place, waiting for me to dig her out. I kept at it, day after day, never pushing Molly past what she could give. The details changed, but the setting stayed the same. The dark, the dirt, the rotten taste in the mouth, the slow suffocation of being buried alive. Every morning she'd give me another layer, a scratch on the wall, a patch of blue carpet, a gold chain snapped in half, one end slick with blood. She described the grain of wood under her fingernails, the shape of the crawl space, the exact cadence of the shovel as it cut through clay. I mapped the house's layout on a fresh pad, cross-referenced the dreams with the floor plan from public records. I brought in an old buddy from the department, told him I was doing a little freelance environmental hazard consulting. We walked the perimeter, checked the crawl space, made notes on the foundation. My friend found a patch of disturbed soil near the porch, but it could have been anything. A raccoon, a broken pipe, a DIY disaster. I didn't tell him about the dreams. On the 5th morning, Molly surprised me. She came to the table before I even set up the tape recorder, hands fidgeting with a strand of her own hair. "I remembered something new," she said, voice thin but urgent. I clicked my pen. "Go ahead." "There was a window," she said. "Not a real one, just a square of light, really small, up near the ceiling." She traced a shape on the table. It was covered with plastic. I could hear the rain, but I couldn't feel it. She looked up, straight at me, with those ruined eyes. "Does that mean anything?" I didn't know, but I'd worked enough cases to know the truth hid in those kinds of details, the bits that didn't belong, the things no one could invent. "It might," I said, and for the first time in months, I felt the old rush, the sense that I was getting close. I left the house with the window detail burning a hole in my skull. I called in a favor at City Hall, got access to the original blueprints, and found what I was looking for. A sub-basement, sealed over in the 70s, with a single vented window at ground level. I circled the address and set my alarm for dawn. Tomorrow, I'd bring a shovel. When Molly was an infant, she slept so deeply that I'd wake 3 times a night just to check her breathing. Every hour, I'd hover a hand over her chest, waiting for the rise and fall. It was the only time in my life I felt truly alive. Those midnight vigils, the hum of the house, the hush that made every tiny movement sacred. Now I would have traded all of it to keep her from sleep. The week after the police came, I tried to reconstruct a normal life. Cereal in bowls, teeth brushed, then rebrushed when she complained about the taste. Homework stacked on the end of the table, untouched. I left notes in her lunch. "Smile at someone today," and "You are loved," like I could put her back together with glitter pens and positive reinforcement. It didn't work. She slept less and less. When she did, she woke up screaming or thrashing, her sheets tangled around her legs, sweat pooling in the hollow above her collarbone. By the 3rd night, I stopped sleeping altogether. I sat in the hallway with a book in my lap, waiting for the next scream. Molly's dreams got worse. She'd call out names that weren't hers, use words I'd never heard from her mouth. Once, she moaned "Rebecca" over and over, the name trailing off into a long, wet gasp. I tried to soothe her, but she batted me away, furious and wild-eyed. She started to walk in her sleep. The first time, I found her in the bathroom with the lights off, staring at the black void in the mirror. She mumbled something about yellow dresses and cats. But when I asked her in the morning, she claimed not to remember. The second time, she made it to the backyard. I woke to the creak of the screen door and a thin, high whine. At first I thought it was a coyote, but it was Molly, barefoot and shivering, fingers digging at the mud behind the garage. I wrapped her in a towel and carried her inside. She weighed nothing. She was still asleep when I tucked her in. As I pulled the blanket up to her chin, she grabbed my wrist and said, in a voice that didn't belong to her, "He promised he'd bring me home." I froze. She let go and rolled over, already somewhere else. The pediatrician said it was trauma, a perfectly normal response for a child who'd just helped solve a murder. The psychiatrist said it was a kind of empathy, that Molly was processing the world's pain through her own raw nerves. They both prescribed rest and routine. I tried. I really did. But every morning I found her in a different place. Curled under the dining table, slumped in the laundry basket, pressed flat against the front door as if trying to squeeze through the gap. Sometimes she'd hum that same broken lullaby, the one the detective had asked about. I'd catch myself humming it too, without meaning to. At night, the house changed. The walls creaked and settled, and the air got thick, oily. The dreams didn't belong to Molly alone. I started having them too. Visions of digging, wet earth under my nails, the taste of rot and iron in my mouth. Sometimes I'd wake with the sheet pulled tight across my face, smothering me. I checked her breathing. On the fourth night, Molly stood at the foot of my bed, eyes wide open. Her nightgown was soaked through, and her feet left little crescent moons of dirt on the carpet. "Mom," she said, voice flat, "he's looking for me now." I reached for her, but she stepped back, shaking her head. "Don't let him in," she whispered. "He's getting closer." I sat up, heart thundering in my ears. "Who's getting closer?" She looked at the window, then at the door, and then at me. "The man from the house, the one with the cane, he walks funny, like he's stepping over something." She turned and left the room, walking straight and sure despite the blindness. I followed her down the hall, past the kitchen, out to the porch. The wind had picked up, and the trees along Sycamore Avenue bent and groaned. I waited, arms crossed tight against my ribs, as Molly stood on the first step, listening. After a minute, she spoke. "He's digging again." I heard nothing but the wind and the low rumble of traffic, but I believed her. The next day, I Googled everything I could about the missing girl, Rebecca Harlow, age 8, last seen in a yellow dress with her hair in braids. I found old news clippings, interviews with her mother, grainy photos of the search teams combing the woods. Every article mentioned her love of cats, her habit of wandering. None of them mentioned a lullaby. But when I played a recording of Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, Molly sang along in a voice that wasn't hers. She kept time with a little clap, a stutter in the rhythm, just like in one of the videos I found on a local news site, a home movie of Rebecca singing the same song, the clap always coming a half beat late. After that, I stopped asking questions. I watched over Molly as she slept, checked her breathing, waited for the next time she'd wake and tell me what she'd seen. I kept the doors locked, the windows bolted, every light in the house burning through the night. But the dark always came back, and with it, the sound of digging getting closer every night. Bridges's house looked worse in daylight. The siding was the color of old cheese, streaked with moss, and the yard's half-dead grass stood up in wiry clumps like an old man's beard. The duck mailbox was still there, but now it glared at us like it knew what we'd come to do. Stokes drove. She parked on the curb, left the engine running, and gave me a look that said, "This is on you, old man." I was past the age where looks bothered me. I let myself out and took the sidewalk slow, counting each footstep like a metronome. At the door, I knocked twice. Cop knock, not neighbor knock. I heard movement inside, then a pause, then the latch. Bridges answered in his usual uniform, plaid shirt, jeans, socks, but no shoes. He leaned on his cane and squinted through the gap. "Mr. Marshall," he said. "Detective." His gaze flicked to Stokes, who was already halfway up the walk. "Morning, Walt," I said, using the neighbor tone. "Mind if we come in for a minute? Just a routine follow-up." He looked past us, scanning for threats, then shrugged and opened the door. Inside, the house was worse than I remembered. The air was thick and sweet with the smell of rotting fruit and old plywood. Boxes crowded the hallway, stacked 3 deep, all labeled in Bridges's tiny, obsessive handwriting: Xmas, tools, junk, keep. There was a blanket of cat hair over every surface, and the scent of ammonia made my eyes sting. Stokes followed me in, her hands buried in the pockets of her raincoat. She had a knack for making herself look harmless, but I knew she was cataloging exits, weapons, and threats before I'd even crossed the threshold. "Sorry about the mess," Bridges said, voice flat. "Haven't had time to tidy up." "No problem," I said. "We won't be long." We started in the living room. There were trophies on the shelves: bowling, darts, a single Employee of the Month plaque from a hardware store that went out of business before Stokes was born. On the TV, a game show played to itself. Bridges settled onto a recliner, set his cane across his lap, and stared at the screen. "What's this about exactly?" he said, not looking at us. Stokes smiled, all teeth. "We're doing a sweep of the neighborhood. There's been some vandalism, kids breaking into crawl spaces, basements. Wanted to make sure you hadn't seen anything out of place." He snorted. "Nothing worth breaking into here. You want to see the crawl space? Be my guest." Stokes nodded. "Would you mind showing us?" Bridges grunted, heaved himself up, and shuffled toward the back of the house. We followed, passing through a narrow hall lined with framed photos, vacation snaps, family barbecues, a few ancient portraits of a young girl I assumed was a niece or granddaughter. He stopped at a door near the kitchen and fumbled with the lock. The knob stuck, and he cursed under his breath. The smell of mildew got stronger. The crawlspace door opened with a shriek. "Watch your head," Bridges said. Stokes ducked in first, then me. The crawlspace was as tight as I'd imagined, 3 feet high, dirt floor, spider webs everywhere. The only light was a bare bulb on a string, and it did nothing to chase away the cold. My knees popped as I knelt down. Stokes clicked on her flashlight and swept it over the ground. "Anyone been down here lately?" Bridges shook his head. "Not unless they came through the vents. I haven't touched it since last spring." I checked the far wall. There was a patch of fresh dirt near the foundation, darker than the rest. It looked like it had been dug up and replaced. I filed the thought away. "You mind if we poke around a bit?" Stokes said. Bridges shrugged again, as if bored by the whole thing. "Knock yourselves out." We took turns crawling the perimeter. Stokes kept her eyes on the ground, but I watched Bridges. He leaned on the doorframe, eyes hooded, every so often flexing the fingers of his free hand. I reached the end of the crawl space, found nothing but old insulation and a dead mouse. As I turned back, I caught a flash of something shiny, just a glint, embedded in the dirt. "Give me the light," I said to Stokes. She passed it over. I dug at the spot with my penknife, scraping away the soil. It was a button, gold-colored, crusted with filth, but still intact. Around the edge, I could just make out the word sunshine. I palmed it, wiped my hand on my coat. "All done," I said, and crawled out. Stokes followed, standing to her full height, stretching the kinks from her back. "Thank you, Mr. Bridges. We appreciate your cooperation." He nodded, silent. We left by the front door. As it closed, Stokes leaned in. "You believe any of that?" I shook my head. "He's hiding something, or he's just that damaged." She looked at the house, then at me. "You think the kid's story lines up?" "I think it's worth checking," I said. I fingered the button in my pocket and walked back to the car. While the adults did their performance, Molly waited on the curb with her mother. I watched them through the windshield as I called in a favor with records. Molly sat perfectly still, eyes closed, chin tilted up toward the pale sky. Ellen hovered, arms wrapped around her own body, as if the only thing holding her together was the force of her own will. After a few minutes, Ellen waved at us and started walking Molly back home. Stokes rolled down the window. "Want me to drop you at the station?" I hesitated, watching the mother and daughter, then shook my head. "Take me to the school. There's something I want to check." Stokes nodded and pulled away from the curb. I didn't find what I wanted at the school. The records were as bare as the first day I checked, but I found something else. A sense that the whole case was pulling at the edges of my reality, threatening to rip it open. Every time I looked at Molly, I saw my own daughter's face, the one I'd lost years before. Every time I saw Ellen, I saw my wife, the way she'd looked at me when I told her our daughter wasn't coming home. I spent the rest of the afternoon tracking down anyone who'd known Rebecca Harlow. Most were dead, moved away, or unwilling to talk. The few who did remember had only scraps. She was quiet, liked to draw, always wore yellow. None of them remembered anything about Bridges. He was invisible, even in his own house. That night, I drove past the Bridges place one last time. The porch light was off, but I could see a pale flicker in the window. I parked across the street and waited. In the darkness, I saw a figure move behind the curtain, small, thin, hair in braids. She pressed her hand against the glass, then vanished. I closed my eyes and tried to tell myself I hadn't seen anything. Later, Ellen called me. Her voice was ragged, shot through with panic. "She's not here," she said. "She's gone." I didn't ask who. I drove to the house in under 5 minutes. Ellen met me at the door, hair wild, face white as chalk. "She was sleepwalking," she said. "I woke up and she wasn't in her bed. I checked everywhere." We searched the house, the yard, the street. Nothing. I called Stokes, told her to check the park and the playground. Still nothing. Finally, I thought to look at the Bridges place. The front door was locked. The windows were dark. But as I circled to the side, I saw a patch of earth by the porch, fresh, loose, darker than the rest. I knelt down and dug with my bare hands. The dirt was cold and wet and clung to my nails. 6 inches down, I hit cloth. Yellow, slick with mud. I dug faster. My hands shook. I pulled her out, alive, barely. Her nightgown was soaked through, her face streaked with mud. But her heart was beating. She clung to me, gasping for air. Behind me, Ellen screamed. I carried Molly to the sidewalk, laid her on the grass, and watched as she breathed in the dawn. Stokes arrived minutes later, siren off, lights dead. She crouched beside me, checked Molly's pulse, then looked at the button in my hand. "Sunshine," she read. "That mean anything?" I nodded, numb. "She said there was a window," I said. She wasn't wrong. When Molly woke, she told me about the dream. The dirt, the darkness, the tiny patch of light. But this time, she said, she wasn't alone. She heard a voice humming in the dark, 5 notes, over and over. She followed the sound, and it led her home. For a minute I wanted to believe, but I knew better. I closed the button in my fist and left it on her pillow when she fell asleep. In the morning, it was gone. The way Ellen glared at the Bridges house from across the street, you'd think she could burn it down by force of will. I pulled the sedan to the curb and let the engine die, headlights off. The only light on Sycamore came from the distant blue spill of a security system across the block. Molly sat between us in the back, hands folded in her lap. Her cane tapped the floor, silent Morse code for, "Let's get this over with." She wore an old sweatshirt, hood up, and slippers caked with grass stains. She was calm, maybe calmer than I'd ever seen her. It didn't comfort me, "You sure about this?" I asked, more to Ellen than to the kid. Ellen didn't answer. She opened the door and waited for Molly to follow. We crossed the lawn in darkness. The grass, wet with evening dew, hissed against our legs. At the porch, Ellen paused. "She's never been inside," she said, a warning more than a statement. I nodded. "That's the whole point." The front door had a security chain and 2 deadbolts. I picked both in under a minute. Occupational hazard. We slipped inside, and I closed the door behind us. The air was thick with that same sour, sweet rot, but sharper now, like old urine and citrus gone to mold. I let my eyes adjust. The layout was just as I remembered. Hall to the left, living room to the right, kitchen straight ahead, boxes everywhere, and the sense that nothing here had been moved in years. "Where to?" I asked Molly. She cocked her head, listened for something I couldn't hear, and pointed down the hall. We moved as a unit. Ellen's hand on her daughter's shoulder, my own hand hovering near the small of Molly's back, not quite touching. We passed the family photos, the bowling trophies, the yellowing snapshots of a girl in braids. One of the frames was cracked, a spiderweb of glass radiating out from her smile. Molly stopped at the end of the hall, next to a door with peeling paint and a brass knob gone green with age. "Here," she said. I checked the knob. It turned, but the door stuck. I leaned in, shoulder first, and felt the frame give with a long, sticky creak. The room beyond was tiny, barely bigger than a closet. The window at the far end was painted shut, a square of plastic taped over the glass. The floor was linoleum, warped and bubbling near the center. In the middle sat a folding chair, and next to it a small child's slipper, caked with dust. Molly moved to the chair, then knelt, running her hand along the floor. "It's here," she said, eyes fixed on the darkness. Ellen tried to pull her away, but Molly shrugged her off. "No, Mom, this is where she was." I felt around the edge of the bubble in the linoleum. Underneath, the floorboards were soft, waterlogged. I pried with my pocket knife until the board splintered, then pulled it up. The smell hit first. Not death, not really. Just old earth and mildew and the faint metallic tang of something left to rust for too long. Under the boards, wrapped around a plastic grocery bag, was the yellow ribbon. I pulled it free, handed it to Ellen, and reached for the bag. It was knotted tight, but inside I could see the outline of a shoebox. I worked the bag open, careful not to rip the brittle plastic. The box was pink, with faded cartoon cats along the side. I popped the lid. Inside, a handful of marbles, a hairbrush with yellow hairs tangled in the bristles, a broken keychain, sunshine, and a stack of letters bound with yarn. Molly pressed her palm to the open box. "She wanted to come home," she said, voice flat but sure. Ellen lost it. She sat down hard, clutching the ribbon to her chest, sobbing into her fist. I closed the box and set it on the floor. We sat in that tiny room, just breathing, for a long time. When Ellen could speak, she looked at me, eyes red and raw. "What do we do now?" I didn't have an answer, but I knew what had to come next. We left the house as quietly as we'd entered. I locked the door behind us, double-checked the latch, and hustled the 2 of them back to the car. At the curb, Molly turned to face the house one last time. She stood there, listening to something I couldn't hear. Then she smiled. A real smile, small but alive. "She's gone now," she said. Ellen scooped her up and held her close. I climbed in the driver's seat, cradling the box on my lap, and watched the dark windows until I was sure nothing was watching back. News moves faster in a small town than anywhere else in the world. You could set fire to City Hall, and the neighbors would have your shoe size, blood type, and list of personal grievances before the first siren hit Main Street. The morning after we broke into Bridges's house, the details were already out. Old man hoards dead girl's toys. Creepy button collector under police investigation. That investigator is still hanging around. Must be something with the mother. The more I tried to keep things contained, the more the story grew teeth. I avoided the grocery, the post office, even the drive-thru, but the gossip trailed me like dog shit on a good pair of boots. Stokes called to warn me that a concerned citizens group had been asking about my visits to the Reed house. "They think you're stirring up trouble," she said, "or that you're working some kind of angle." "What kind of angle?" she sighed. "Ghost hunting, psychic stuff. One guy said you're running a child seance ring." I snorted. "Never even had the chance. Just be careful. Bridges is getting jumpy." The next day, the air outside our house was thick with weather and threat. I was sitting on the porch, nursing a mug of black coffee and a hangover, when a familiar old Ford Ranger pulled up to the curb. Bridges got out slow, careful with the cane, but still moving like a man with unfinished business. He limped up the walk, face set in a hard, ugly line. He didn't bother with hello. "I don't know what you think you found," he said, "but it wasn't hers. None of it was. That little girl has never set foot in my home." I nodded, played it casual. Strange, then, how it all lined up. He clenched his jaw so tight I thought he'd break teeth. "Stop filling that child's head with these stories. It's not good for her. She's sick, you know that?" "Sick's a funny word," I said. "She's better than you think." He leaned in, close enough that I could count the burst veins in his nose. "You think you're helping, but you're not. You're making things worse." I didn't respond. I let the silence do the work. After a long minute, he straightened up. "You keep away from my house," he said, "and you keep that girl away too." I sipped my coffee, unbothered. "What are you so scared of, Walt?" He spat into the grass, then turned and walked back to his truck, one leg dragging a little more than before. I found Ellen in the backyard, hanging laundry, even though the clouds threatened rain. She didn't look up as I approached. "He came by," I said. "I saw." Her hands trembled as she clipped a sheet to the line. "Are you going to let him scare you off?" I shook my head. "He's just mad we found the box." She nodded, jaw clenched. "He can be as mad as he wants. I'm not letting him win." Molly was sitting in the grass, plucking clover and weaving it into little crowns. She hummed to herself, not the lullaby this time, but a minor key tune I couldn't place. I sat beside her, tried to join in the weaving. My hands were too big, too clumsy. "You okay, kid?" She shrugged. "He's still mad." "Who?" "The man in the house." I looked at Ellen, who looked away. "Has he done anything?" I asked. "Said anything?" "He stands at the window now," Molly said, not looking up. "Sometimes at night I see him watching." I ruffled her hair. "If he ever tries to come in, you tell me. I'll take care of it." She nodded, serious. That night, the dreams came back. I woke to the sound of footsteps, slow, dragging, wet with the promise of rain. I lay in bed, heart hammering, and listened as they circled the house, each step closer than the last. A shadow crossed my window. It stopped, waited. I got up, moved to the hallway. Ellen was already there, eyes wide, mouth a hard line. We stood in the dark together, listening to the footsteps pace and pause, then resume, a spiral getting tighter and tighter around our home. The next morning the grass was trampled and muddy, as if someone had walked the perimeter of the house all night long. On the porch, a single yellow button, still wet from the dew. I called Stokes, told her everything, and she promised to send a patrol by every hour. I didn't know if it would help. I didn't know if anything would. The town kept its distance, but the rumor mill spun faster. I heard about prayer circles and a petition to have Ellen and Molly examined. I even caught wind of a story that said I'd planted the box myself, desperate for a headline. It didn't matter. I kept coming back every morning, every evening, waiting for the world to make sense again. On the last night before Halloween, Molly had another dream. She came into the kitchen, hair a wild mess, pajamas torn at the hem. "He's not alone anymore," she said, voice flat. "There's a woman now. She wears a red scarf, and she screams all the time." Ellen and I exchanged a look. "Did you see her face?" Ellen asked. "No," said Molly. "She keeps it covered." I thought of the old case files. The woman with the red scarf. The teacher at the school, the one who saw Rebecca last. "Is she angry?" I asked. Molly shook her head. "She's scared. She keeps trying to find her way out, but she can't." Ellen crouched down, held Molly close. "It's just a dream, honey. Nothing can hurt you here." But I knew better. I looked out the window, saw nothing but the dark and the rain, and wondered how many more ghosts this town could hold. Later, after the world had quieted, I found Molly's note on the kitchen table. It was written in her careful, blocky print. "Don't let him in. Keep the doors locked. He can't come inside if you don't invite him." I taped it to the door, just in case. Then I turned off the lights, checked every window, and sat in the living room, waiting for morning. By the time Halloween bled into November, half the town was convinced the next great tragedy would be televised live from our own block. People watched the Reed House and the bridges place the way you stare at a pair of drunks circling the last stool in a dive bar, fascinated and afraid of who'd be left standing. The Homeowners Association put out a statement about community vigilance and protecting our children, which meant patrol cars rolled Sycamore every hour, and every parent walked their kid to the school bus like it was the last chopper out of Saigon. News vans loitered at the corner, reporters fishing for an angle that didn't sound like a rerun. I got 3 phone calls from journalists, 2 from old precinct buddies, and 1 from an occult expert who smelled like beef jerky over a landline. Molly's nightmares spread like a fungus. Every other day I got an email from her mother. "No sleep last night. Panic attack at breakfast. Walked out the front door at 2 a.m., said she was following the sound of rain." Ellen started chain-smoking again, and the ashtray in her kitchen overflowed by noon. I told myself I was just the observer, not part of the mess, but the bags under my eyes got darker anyway. It was Detective Stokes who finally said what we were all thinking. "We need to get inside that house before something else happens." She wore her hair in a tighter bun than usual, and her jaw looked like it had been carved from a cinder block. We sat in the front seat of her unmarked paperwork spread between us, the heater struggling against the chill. "What do you think we'll find?" I asked, voice cracking like an old record. "Evidence," she said, "or at least enough probable cause to keep the press off our backs." She didn't say a body, but she didn't need to. We got the warrant on a Friday, rubber-stamped by a circuit judge who used to play poker with my old man. He didn't ask too many questions, just signed and slid it across the desk with a look that said, "God help you if this goes sideways." The official search team was 2 uniforms, Stokes and me, in the role of consulting investigator, which sounded impressive until you realized it mostly meant standing in corners and pretending not to judge the real cops. We rolled up to the Bridges place just after sunrise before the neighbors had a chance to film us. Walt's truck was in the driveway, but the curtains stayed closed as we knocked. He answered on the 3rd round, shirt buttoned, cane in hand, 2 days of stubble frosting his chin. The house smelled like mildew and old sweat, maybe a hint of cleaning solvent from a last-minute panic mop. He stared at the paper Stokes held out, then at her face, then at mine. "You got a warrant?" he said, voice thick as cold grease. Just routine, Stokes replied, polite but lethal. He glared, but stepped aside. Don't track mud on the rug. The first sweep was for show. Stokes split the uniforms, one for the main floor, one for the basement. I took the upstairs with Walt in tow, watching my every move like a man afraid I'd pocket his family heirlooms. Never seen so many boxes, I said, running a hand along a stack labeled Xmas 1991. He shrugged. You never seen a man live alone for 30 years, either. I made a show of checking closets, drawers, under the bed. Everything smelled like mothballs and cheap soap, except the guest room, which smelled like nothing at all. It was bare except for a stripped mattress and a single photograph on the wall. Walt, in his 20s, flanked by 2 women. The faces were blurred by time and maybe a thumbprint. Who's that? I asked. My sister and her kid, he said, eyes going flat. They don't visit anymore. I didn't press. Some doors you open, some you don't. Downstairs, Stokes called out. Basement's clear except for the spiders. Walt snorted. Hope you gave 'em a warning first. We gathered in the kitchen where the air was thickest. The uniforms tried not to meet my gaze. Stokes read through the checklist, then closed the folder with a snap. That's it for now, Mr. Bridges, she said. If you think of anything else, let us know. He grunted, walked us to the door, and locked it behind us before we were off the porch. Outside, Ellen and Molly waited in their battered sedan, fogged windows barely hiding the tension inside. Ellen looked like she hadn't slept in a month. Molly's face was a blank, unreadable mask. She clutched a battered sketchbook, knuckles white. Stokes and I crossed the street. The press pack had started to stir, antennae twitching as we emerged. Anything? Ellen asked, hope and dread in equal measure. Not yet, Stokes said, softening her tone, but we'll keep at it. Molly looked up. He didn't show you the closet, she said, voice low. Stokes frowned. Which closet, honey? Molly shrugged. The one he never opens. I felt the hair on my arms salute. Where is it, Molly? She closed her eyes, drew a shaky square in the air. End of the hall, left side, smells like old paint and lemons. Stokes shot me a look. We checked all the closets. Not this one, Molly whispered. He keeps a chair against it. Ellen looked at me, and for the first time I saw real fear, not just for her daughter, but of her. Stokes sighed. We'll try again tomorrow. No, said Molly. You have to go now. He's going to hide it. She was shaking. Ellen put a hand on her back, but Molly flinched away. Please, Molly said, voice sharp as a razor. If you wait, it'll be gone. The air changed. I felt it, and so did Stokes. She straightened up, already dialing in her head. Okay, she said. Let's go back. Walt opened the door faster this time, eyes narrow. You forget something? There's another closet, Stokes said. End of the hall, left side. He stood firm. Just the coat closet. We need to see it, I said. I tried to keep my tone neutral, but it came out too soft. He stared at us, jaw working, then stepped aside. Fine, be my guest. The hallway was tight, walls lined with old plaques and bowling pins. The closet was where Molly said. Left side, chair wedged under the knob. Walt reached for the chair, but Stokes stopped him. Mind if we move that? He dropped his hand, lips pressed thin. Go ahead. The uniform at my back slid the chair aside. Stokes turned the knob. The door opened, but only a few inches. It hit something inside. I squeezed through. It was a utility closet lined with shelves of paint cans, rags, and old hardware. The smell was sharp, Lemons, yes, but also something underneath, like rot and sour milk. The far wall had a hatch, maybe 12 inches square, covered in gray paint. I crouched, ran my hand around the hatch. The edge was sticky, like it had been glued shut. "Got a screwdriver?" I asked. Stokes signaled the uniform, who produced a multi-tool from her belt. I pried at the edge, careful not to splinter the wood. It gave, slow and stubborn, then popped free. Cold air rushed out, carrying a stink of wet earth and rust. Behind me, Walt made a choking sound. "You people are insane," he spat. "There's nothing back there." I ignored him, reached into the crawlspace. My fingers touched plastic, then something softer. I pulled, and a child's slipper, yellow, caked in dust, came free. Stokes knelt beside me. She took the slipper, turned it over in her hand. The heel was marked with a name, written in faded Sharpie. Rebecca. Back in the living room, Walt collapsed on the recliner, face gray. He stared at the wall, refusing to meet anyone's eye. Outside, the press vans turned their cameras to the house, like a flock of buzzards waiting for the first twitch. In the car, Ellen held Molly close. The girl was sweating, lips blue. She rocked back and forth, whispering to herself. "Is it over?" Ellen asked, but I didn't have an answer. I watched the cops tape off the porch, watched Stokes slip on gloves and bag the slipper, watched Walt Bridges fold in on himself. In the passenger seat, Molly drew a new picture, her fingers moving faster than ever before. I leaned over, squinted at the page. It was the closet, the hatch, the dark beyond. At the center, a child in yellow waited for someone to find her. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at my window, watched the lights across the street, and listened to the sound of a town waiting for its ghosts to come home. They found the body before breakfast. The uniform knocked on my door with knuckles so light it took 3 tries to wake me, even though I'd been sitting at the table with a cold mug of coffee and a view of the Bridges place the whole night through. I opened the door, and he looked surprised to see me dressed. "You want to be there, sir?" he asked, as if there was a chance in hell I'd stay behind. I told him to wait. I slipped on my old coat, the one with the bloodstain inside the cuff, from a long-ago bar fight, and followed him into the morning. The grass on Walt's lawn was stiff with frost. 2 forensics vans crowded the curb, joined by a half-circle of squad cars and the rolling blimp of a Channel 6 news truck. I slipped through the police tape, ignored the camera lens tracking my every breath. The air was the kind that grates the skin and fills your lungs with the memory of something dead. Inside, the whole house vibrated with a kind of queasy anticipation. Walt himself was slumped on the sofa, wrists cuffed, 2 officers standing over him like undertakers in rehearsal. He didn't look up when I passed. I got the sense he'd been up all night, too. The closet at the end of the hall was open, and the hatch yawned black and bottomless. 2 techs were down on their bellies, flashlights between their teeth, digging with slow, careful hands. Stokes crouched at the threshold, hair pulled back so tight it made her look years younger, or maybe just more awake. She spotted me. "Didn't expect you this early," she said. "I don't sleep much." She grunted. "You want to see?" I nodded. She motioned me in. It wasn't pretty. They'd dug out a pocket in the dirt, a hollowed space just big enough for a child to curl up. There was a bundle wrapped in a yellow dress, stained black where the fabric had absorbed everything the earth could give back. A plastic grocery bag held the rest. A shoebox, a tangle of brittle hair, a handful of marbles, the broken sunshine keychain. I watched one of the techs peel the dress away from the remains. The skull was smaller than I remembered from any case file, the teeth like rows of pale pearls. I could feel the shape of Molly's dream pressing against the back of my own eyes. 5 notes, over and over. Stokes knelt beside the bundle, hands gloved but steady. "You want to do the honors?" I shook my head. "She's not mine." She nodded, then turned to the officers waiting in the hall. "Call the ME. Tell them to bring the child kit." The uniforms moved out, leaving us with the dead. Stokes stared into the crawl space for a long time. "I hate this part," she said. I looked at the child, then at her. "Which part?" She tapped her temple, just once. "The knowing." We left the closet and found Walt exactly where we left him. He didn't look up until Stokes said, "You're under arrest for the murder of Rebecca Harlow." He blinked, once, twice. Then he smiled, small and mean. "You can't prove shit," he said. "We don't have to," she replied. "She already did." She jerked her thumb at me, but we both knew who she meant. They walked him out in handcuffs. The news crews filmed every step. The neighbors lined the sidewalk, some in robes, some clutching coffee, all of them hungry for the spectacle. In the crowd, I saw Ellen and Molly. Ellen's face was raw, a cut that would never heal. Molly stood beside her, arms folded, expression flat. When the police car passed, Walt turned his head and stared at Molly through the window, as if daring her to look away. She didn't. The car rolled off, lights off, and the crowd started to murmur again, like a hive returning to work after the Queen has been killed. The press didn't care about the truth, only the drama. Within hours, the news cycle was a storm of miracle child, psychic link, the curse of Mill Ridge. The talk radio guys called me a glory hound. The Facebook crowd called for exorcisms, arson, and a parade in Molly's honor, sometimes all in the same thread. I fielded 5 interview requests before noon and 3 death threats by sundown. The only thing that mattered was how Molly and Ellen took it. I checked on them that afternoon. Their house was a war zone of sympathy cards and uneaten casseroles. Ellen wore sunglasses indoors, chain-smoked Virginia Slims, and used the word miracle the way most people use fuck. "She hasn't slept since," Ellen whispered, voice wrecked. "Every time she closes her eyes, it's the same dream. Only now she's the one in the hole, not the other girl." I tried to think of something useful to say. "She's safe now," I managed, and even I didn't believe it. Ellen took a drag. "It doesn't matter. It's always going to be there." In the living room, Molly sat on the couch, sketchbook in her lap, pen scratching the paper in tight, angry spirals. I sat beside her. "You want to talk?" I said. She shook her head but kept drawing. "Okay," I said, "but I'll sit here anyway." We sat in silence. Her hand moved faster, then slower, then stopped. She ripped the page out, handed it to me. It was the closet, the hatch. Only this time, the child in yellow was gone, and the space was empty. I smiled. "You did good, Molly." She didn't look up, but she leaned into my shoulder. We stayed that way until Ellen came in and turned on the TV, drowning the room in static and daytime court shows. They held the press conference the next morning. Stokes wore her best suit and read from a statement. She called it "Closure for a Decades-Old Tragedy" and "An Example of the Resilience of Our Community." She didn't mention Molly by name, but everyone in town knew who she meant. Walt Bridges pled not guilty at arraignment. He said nothing to the press, nothing to his lawyer, and nothing to the world. When the judge asked if he understood the charges, he just stared at the ceiling, like he'd found a crack in the plaster only he could see. By evening, every trick-or-treater in Mill Ridge had a new story to tell. The old man across the street? Serial killer. The girl in the blindfold? Ghost whisperer? The detective with the limp? Real-life monster hunter. I preferred the old rumors. But that's the thing about stories. They grow legs when you're not looking. On the last night before November, I stopped by the Reed house one more time. Ellen answered in her pajamas, hair wild, a glass of wine in her hand. "She's sleeping," she said, voice soft. "First time since it happened." I nodded, awkward. "You want a drink?" she asked. I said sure. We sat in the kitchen, drank her boxed Merlot, and didn't say a word for 5 whole minutes. Finally, Ellen spoke. "Do you ever stop being scared?" "No," I said, "but you get used to it." She laughed, bitter and bright. "That's what I'm afraid of." She looked at me, eyes bright and tired. "Thank you," she said, "for believing her." I shrugged. "Wasn't my idea." She poured another glass. "Doesn't matter. You did anyway." That night I watched the Reed house from my own window. Every light was off except Molly's bedroom, where a faint glow flickered behind the curtain. I thought of the girl in the closet, the dreams, the holes that never get filled. Somewhere in the night, the light finally went out. It was the first good sign I'd seen in years. They held the memorial on a Tuesday, which struck me as the worst possible day for a funeral, but maybe that was the point. Nobody in Mill Ridge wanted to give up a good weekend for ghosts, and by Tuesday, the shock had faded just enough for people to pretend it was all background noise. The service was in the old Methodist church at the edge of town, the kind of building designed to make you feel like a better person just for sitting in its pews. The place smelled like polished wood and bad coffee. They'd set up a display in the lobby, Rebecca's 4th-grade photo, a yellow ribbon, and a line of battered dolls arranged like mourners in miniature. There was a box for cards and donations to the family, even though her family was long gone. The turnout was better than I'd have guessed. News vans circled the parking lot, but the cameras kept their distance. The mayor spoke, so did the principal of the elementary school, each reciting the same litany: tragic loss, closure, healing, the value of community. They said her name often and well, like the repetition might fill up the years she'd been gone. Ellen and Molly sat together in the second row, hands entwined, both dressed in black. Molly's hair was combed, her eyes alert but tired. She didn't look at anyone else, just stared at the front, as if waiting for something only she could see. A few people shot them sidelong glances, some grateful, some wary. Hero and outcast, all in the same breath. After the service, I wandered outside. It was unseasonably warm. The air was wet and heavy, clinging to the skin like a shroud. People milled around, murmuring comfort to the family, or scanning the crowd for someone more interesting to talk to. I caught up to Stokes near the bottom of the church steps. She was chain-smoking, eyes narrowed against the sun. "Thought you didn't go for this kind of thing," I said. She shrugged. "I don't, but the chief said it'd look bad if we didn't show." She flicked her ash onto the grass, watching the kids chase each other around the parking lot. "You think she's going to be all right?" she asked, jerking her chin at Molly. "I think she's stronger than we are," I said, "but that's not the same as all right." "Doesn't seem fair," Stokes muttered. "It never is." She nodded, said nothing, and lit another cigarette. The aftermath was less dramatic than I expected. The press drifted away, hungry for fresher tragedy. Walt Bridges made bail, pending trial, but nobody saw him again. Rumor had it he moved in with a cousin 3 counties east, or maybe just evaporated into whatever limbo people like him go to when their secrets run dry. The house on Sycamore stayed empty, yellow paint curling in the sun, as if the place itself was exhausted. Life in the Reed house crept back toward normal. Molly went back to school, where the other kids alternated between reverence and terror. The principal asked me to give a talk about trauma awareness, which I politely declined. I preferred to leave the past in the rear view. Ellen switched to decaf, quit smoking, started running again. She hung the yellow ribbon in their kitchen window, right where the morning light caught it, and never once mentioned taking it down. I stopped by once a week. Sometimes Ellen and I would talk over coffee, but mostly I just sat on the porch with Molly, listening to the silence between us. She drew less now, or maybe just kept the pictures to herself. When I asked how she was, she always said the same thing. Better. The nightmares faded. First every other night, then just on weekends, then not at all. One Saturday morning, I found Molly on the porch with her sketchbook closed and her head tipped back toward the sky, counting the crows as they passed overhead. "No dreams?" I asked. "No dreams," she confirmed. "Just regular sleep." She thought for a moment, then added, "It's quieter now." She didn't say whether that was a good thing or a bad thing, but I took it as a victory. I think about Rebecca sometimes, not the girl in the yellow dress, but the ghost that Molly carried with her, her voice, her fear, her memories leaking through the cracks. I wonder if she's finally at rest, or if there are more like her out there, waiting for someone with the right kind of vision to bring them home. Molly's gift, or curse, or whatever you want to call it, never left her. I could see it in the way she listened, really listened, to the world, as if every breath of wind might be telling her a secret. The town called her miracle, witch, and freak in equal measure, but none of that seemed to matter. She was herself, and that was enough. On the 1-year anniversary, they planted a tree in Rebecca's memory. Ellen brought a casserole, Stokes brought the department's condolences, and Molly tied the yellow ribbon to a branch just above her head. The whole town stood in a circle, holding hands, pretending they hadn't spent a year tearing each other apart with rumors and blame. When it was over, Molly found me near the edge of the crowd. "Do you believe in ghosts?" she asked. I thought about it, then shrugged. "Not really, but I believe in you." She smiled, then looked past me toward the tree. "That's good enough." That night, I sat on my porch, watched the wind move through the bare branches, and listened to the quiet. The neighborhood was changed, maybe for good. There were fewer secrets and more to fear, but at least nobody pretended otherwise. When I went to bed, I dreamed of nothing at all.